So we're out here today just taking a short walk. It's kind of cold out and the trails are kind of weird because one section is solid frozen snow so hard it's like ice, and then the next section is mud and running water, so it's a real mess out here. Just doing a short walk while you're out running some errands. You gotta take a look at Cookie. She's, I don't know if I have the phone just right so you can see her. She's so goofy. She just loves to roll in the snow. She's such a funny dog. And I'm in this spot that has a lot of pine trees. I just love pine trees, and it got me thinking about Fatwood and what it is and how it forms and how awesome it is if you're ever stuck out in the woods and need to make a fire. Fatwood is where the sap in a pine tree collects, and it becomes almost like the wood becomes so hard, it's like cutting into plastic sometimes. It's just like a hard resinous material. And it's really cool because it's waterproof. So even if it's wet, it'll still catch fire, and it'll catch fire like, wow, it really catches fire. And so it makes a great fire starter if you're stuck out in the woods, and it's just awesome. So how you find it is you look for a pine tree that's fallen down and has started to rot away. And the more rotten the pine tree is, the better your fatwood is going to be. I watched a couple videos that said the only place to find fatwood is in the stump of a tree, an old pine tree, and I'm going to tell you right now that's not true. I have found fatwood in pine trees that have fallen just wherever there's a knot, wherever a branch and a trunk has connected. There will be fatwood there, and depending on how mature the tree was and how long the tree's been sitting there, it makes either a better or not so good fatwood. But all fatwood is good. All fatwood will catch and burn well. I'm having a hard time explaining. Think much? So the more mature the tree was and the longer it's been laying on the ground and rotted away, the better the fatwood's going to be. But I have pulled knots off of pretty small trunks, and it wasn't there a long time. I mean, he'd started to rot. The bark was pretty rotted, but the trunk was still pretty solid, and cut those knots off and took them home, and they were like, pfft. So I have a bunch of stuff at home that someday when I get around to processing it, I'll show you guys how it works. But here's one way to identify whether or not it's a pine tree. Okay, I have to do that video again. I did a video and none of it worked. So you're going to find fatwood in downed trees, and how to tell if it's a pine tree or not, because fatwood only comes from pine trees. So if you look at the deciduous trees, there's no pattern to the branches. Right? Like this log here, this log here. There's no pattern to the branches. They're just haphazard. But now look at the pine trees there in the distance. All the branches are grouped together, going around the trunk like the spokes of a bicycle wheel or a starburst. So if you look at this log here, you can tell, okay, even though it's half buried by snow, it's pine because the branches are all in groups like a starburst going around it with a little space in between each starburst. That's how you know it's a pine tree. This is not a very big pine tree, and the trunk of it is a little rotted, but still pretty solid in parts. But I've knocked a few knots off of this and brought them home and cut them open, and it was great firewood inside. Sometimes you can even find bits laying on the ground like this that just broke off a pine tree, and you take this home And you see how all of it's rotted away, but this part here where the knots are is still solid. You take that home and you cut that open, it's going to be nice fatwood on the inside. Like there's a chunk right there, little chunk right there. Well, it's not little, but you could take that home and cut that open, and it's going to be nice fatwood on the inside. So the bigger the tree was and the more rotted it is, the better the fatwood's going to be, because all the sap and all the resin ran to those knotty spots and collected. But it doesn't have to be a big mature tree and doesn't have to be totally rotted. You'll still have some sap in those knots, and they'll still work better than anything else you could find out there. So that tree right there that's laying down, that's a pine tree, because you can see how the branches are all in groups, or the space between each group, and all the branches go around the tree like bicycle spokes. I probably wouldn't try harvesting from it just yet. I'd let it rot away just a little bit more, because that makes it easier to harvest too. If the more rotted away the log is, the easier it's going to be to harvest. So I've harvested a couple of knots off of downed logs that were barely rotted. They still made great fire starters, the knots. But it was hard to get them off because you needed a saw or a hatchet or an axe. And then I found a log that was so rotted away that the only thing that was left were the branch areas. So something like that, it's really easy to harvest. You just pick it up, take it home, and then chop it up when you get it home. Or shave pieces off of it if you're out there camping or in a survival situation. You know, I gave one chunk a couple kicks with my foot and all the rotted wood just like fell off of it, and I was left with these solid knots. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. And take your knife out and do a little shaving of that knot, shave off some pieces, hit it with your ferro rod, and boom, you got a little fire started. Here's another nice down pine tree. You see how the branches are in groups, sticking out pretty straight too. It's not like deciduous trees where the branches kind of go up. The pine trees, the branches kind of go out, like straight out, almost perpendicular. This tree is not rotted. It's still got a lot of bark on it, so I wouldn't try harvesting from it. Although I'm sure you could, and I'm sure the fatwood would be good. But I just find it seems like it's better the more it's had a chance to rot, and it's just easier to, like I said, it's just way easier to harvest. So here's a log. See this one? That was a pretty big tree. There's the stump right there. And it still has a lot of its bark on it. And it's, you know, it's pretty solid. You know, it's pretty solid. But down here at the end, I knocked a couple of knots off of little branches that were sticking up here. And knocked them off, took them home, and oh, it's just great fire starter. Look at this one. Look at all that cheddar. This would be a nice one to grab. The log itself is almost totally rotted away. Now you're left there with a big chunk of fatwood. And there's even some knots and pieces laying here on the ground that you could pick up. And wonderful, beautiful fatwood inside there. Here's something really cool. So I picked up this piece. You see the way that's shaped? And that end is so hard from the resin that's in it, you could almost use it like an axe and chop away the rotted pieces from this other piece. Look at that. Breaks it right off. That's how hard the fatwood gets because of the pine resin in it. So you definitely need a knife to harvest it. But yeah, you could, that piece is pretty tough. So I found this laying out in the woods. And I said, oh, it's pine. You can tell because of the way the branch is going around it. I brought it home. And you see even a tiny little branch like this. And look at how little this is, right? I cut it off with the hatchet. And look at the color in here and in the end here. Now the really neat thing is this part here that's really dark. I can't even dig my nail into it, and it doesn't have the consistency of like a regular piece of wood. It's Fatwood, and it's so soaked with resin, it's going to light on fire like a torch. It's so hard. It's got like the consistency of like plastic. I can't even easily dig my fingernail into it. So people that tell you online that you have to find a tree stump or a huge tree to find Fatwood, you actually don't. You just need to find a pine tree that's been on the ground and everything has rotted away. You can see everything was rotted away except for the branches and the knots, or the knots where the branches were. Because the branches were gone, the trunk is gone, this was all that was left laying there. You cut that puppy open and you are going to have Fatwood, and even the little pieces will light up. Look at this little tiny piece. See that? See how it's really shiny? I don't know if you can tell. See how shiny, when the sun glares on it, see how shiny that is? And I cannot put my fingernail into it. I can't. It feels like a hard piece of plastic. And you put a lighter to that, or a match to that, fireworks. Okay, maybe not fireworks, but it's going to torch up. Awesome fire starter. And look at how little. You do not have to find a huge tree and go there with chainsaws. All you gotta do is find the right tree, pine tree that's been laying there for a long time. See how this, everything around this was all rotted away. All that was left was this little piece stuck to that little piece I showed you. And then here's all Fatwood, all fire starter food. You hear that? You hear my fingernail scraping on that? It's gonna wear out my fingernail before I'll break the wood. That is Fatwood, people. That is New Jersey Fatwood. Look at that. It's awesome. Fire starter.